Hi, I'm Alyssa, and welcome to Art This Week. On this week's episode, we visit the Amon Museum of American Art and speak with curator John Rohrbach about the exhibition Color, American Photography Transformed. Now for Art This Week.
Hi, welcome to Art This Week. We're at the Amon Museum today interviewing John Rohrbach for the Color, American Photography Transformed exhibition. John, can you tell us a little bit about the exhibition, how it came about?
This exhibition came about through my realization that color photography was technically feasible and even used in the commercial world pretty readily for decades before it was accepted within the world of fine arts. And I asked myself the question, why? I wanted to understand that. And then on the second part is understand when color photography was embraced by the artists, what it brought to the fine art photography world, how it changed the world and what it really did.
How did you go about picking the pieces to show at the exhibition that we have here?
I wanted to accomplish a number of things. I had certain access points where I knew color had gained wide acceptance in the 1970s, so that became a starting point. Mm-hmm. But I needed to go back to the beginnings of the medium because I quickly realized that photography came into the world, as we all know, as black and white, but even in those early days in the mid-19th century, photographers wanted to work in color. So I wanted to give examples of those early stages of coming to fruition of color. And then I wanted to carry it forward to the present day because I was curious about how color was used after it was accepted and how it's used today.
So we're standing in front of an Alfred Stieglitz and Laura Gilpin early glass plates. Can you tell us a little bit about who these photographers were? I mean, they were some of the early color photographers, right?
These artists, Stieglitz, Laura Gilpin, Edward Steichen in particular, were some of the leaders of fine art photography in the early 20th century. If anybody was going to absorb color and embrace it at that period of time, it would be those people because they would have an effect just by their stature on other artists. And just by their taking it up, they would convince other artists to use it. And they did take it up for varying amounts of time. Stieglitz just took it up for a year and he decided he didn't like it. Steichen stuck with it right through for a few more years and took it right through World War II, and then he gave it up just because of the war World War I, and then gave it up because the war got in the way. And he found more energy with black and white at that point. But this is really where, within fine art photography, the absorption of color at least had its initial play.
And so here we have this Nicholas Murray piece from the Ladies' Home Journal. And is this kind of an introduction to commercial photography, can we say?
Yes, this is actually the real introduction to commercial photography. This is the first color photograph that was printed in an American magazine.
Can you tell us a little bit about the process in which this came about?
It was a very complicated process, and only the most wealthy magazines could really start to take advantage of it. Because at this stage, it's 1931, if you were to make a color photograph, you had to make 3 different exposures, one through a red filter, a second through a green filter, and a third through a blue filter. And then you had to recombine those exposures in making a print. And it was a complicated process such that making prints like these during this period would take hours after hours. To make these prints, Nicholas Murray, the artist, probably spent about 10 or 12 hours just to make these 2 prints. If something goes wrong in the middle of the making of the prints, you stop everything and start over. So it's the commercial world that has the financial wherewithal and the push to bring color into the marketplace for obvious reasons. Color sells. Bright colors attract the eye, and they energize people. So it was very much in their interest to bring color into magazines, and it often occurred in fashion, as you see here. These are fashion studies, and product advertising.
Do you think that because of the advertising that that's possibly another reason why fine art artists didn't really take to it, because you see it as like work for the people, basically.
Some artists would have said that.
Mm-hmm.
Stieglitz would have said that. Steichen walked both sides of that line, so Steichen wouldn't have said that. Part of the issue for artists was that for color photographs to look good, the colors needed to be quite realistic. And the notion was, we see in color, so if you're going to make a color photograph that's just like what we see, you don't have any room to interpret the world. There's no artistic flexibility there. So a range of artists like Stieglitz said, I can use color to, say, make snapshots of my family, but I can't really use it for making art because I don't have expressive flexibility with it.
We're in front of a piece here by Mark Koehn. Can you tell us about the influence that Kodak had on color photography?
So Kodak, of course, introduced Kodachrome, which is the first color film where instead of having to make the 3 shots that we just spoke about, red, green, and blue, you just had to make one photograph, and all of those colors were absorbed into the film on different layers as part of the processing. So it greatly simplified the act of making images. And it made color photography enter the broad marketplace, both for artists and for amateurs, very, very quickly.
And what about Ansel Adams and Edward Weston? They worked with Kodak as well. Do you know anything about that?
Kodak, after World War, let me back up. Kodak introduced Kodachrome in 1936. And they advertise it and try to get people to start making color photographs. But it's very expensive, and that's during the American Great Depression. So build-up of use of color is relatively slow, except in the commercial world where people have more money to be able to put towards color. Then World War II comes along, and color photography is really needed for the war effort, and all of the supplies go to the war effort. After the war, Kodak makes a new push to get amateurs and artists to take up color. And particularly with artists, they approach a number of leading artists of the time. They approach Ansel Adams, Edward Weston, Paul Strand, and Charles Sheeler, and they give them a proposition. We'll give you all the free color film that you want if you just send us back periodically images that you particularly like and allow us to use them to advertise color film. And we'll pay you $250 on top of that. So it was a good deal for those artists who were interested in trying their hand at color. And many artists were. They tried their hand at it. They were curious about it. There's the allure of color, and they wanted to make pictures that were more realistic. So a lot of artists tried their hand at it, and these artists found their way to be able to do it because they were such of high stature at that time that Kodak approached them and said, if Edward Weston can make color photographs and ones that he likes, maybe it's time for you to make color photographs.
That's great. Do you think these photographers actually liked color photography?
Some did and some didn't. And they changed their minds about it. Paul Strand would set up his camera and put a sheet of black and white film in and then expose it and then put a sheet of color film in without ever moving the camera. But his heart was really with black and white. Ansel Adams tried his hand at color but didn't like the results that he was getting simply because he was so used to working with black and white. He loved working in the darkroom and in color. It was much more complicated to make a print, and he didn't want to learn that process. And so he didn't feel that color had that flexibility. Edward Weston initially trumpeted color. He said, some of these early images that I'm getting are as good as anything I've done in black and white. But he was cowed by his colleagues who gave up color quickly into heralding as going back to herald as black and white, and he put his color work aside.
We want to thank John for speaking with us. For more information on the exhibition, go to cartermuseum.org. That's it for Art This Week. Thanks for watching.
I still got your Polaroid.